capitalism, all of the gains in automation, it goes to the owner class. All you have to do is have everyone be an owner, and now suddenly any gain in automation is a gain for everybody. If you grow just one thing, it may not grow as well as if it grows with another thing. A good example of that is called the Three Sisters method of farming.
There is definitely multi-apartment buildings or multi-families that do passive design.
$100 million that they gave to Joe Rogan that they would kind of be out if they breach contract. Is that a bigger number? Or is 2 billion a bigger number?
I don't know, Zach.
It's a tough one. I know.
Really hard.
And maybe comparing numbers is not Jeremy's strong suit. Gotta go kill a Jenny.
I still don't think you should kill her. I don't think it's a good idea.
It's a ghost, dude. Welcome back, everybody, to Bread Theory. So tonight we are doing our 4th of July Extravaganza. And I thought of no better way to honor the memory of the founding fathers than to take another honest look at their legacy and the pivotal Revolutionary War that they fought. So we are going to be continuing on with Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, Chapter 4, and this is Part 2. We're maybe, I don't know, not even a quarter way, maybe a tenth of the way into the chapter. And we are in the chapter that leads up to the Revolutionary War. So we're seeing what the conditions are like for the working class and so on and so forth. Before we start, though, Amanda has a very special thing that she would like to show with to everybody. Are you going to pull up a chair? Or you're just going to loom?
Fine, I'll
Yeah, she's going to go get a chair. And then she will show her very cool creation. I'm not going to spoil it for you.
I think they know what it is.
But it is going to be something for sale. Another way to support the stream. And a way to get something really cool in return for your service of supporting the stream. So I will let her show that as she sits down right now.
Hey, folks. It's Amanda.
Yeah, what do you got for us?
I have recently started my own business of sourdough breads, and it goes by the name of Ouija Bread. I'm on Instagram under the handle of, I believe, _ Ouija Bread underscore.
Yeah, spell out that Ouija for people. I'm going to put it in the chat too, but spell it out just in case someone's listening.
Ouija.
So underscore Ouija.
Bread.
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 Is there underscore at the end? Okay.
Yep.
Very cool. So that's on Instagram. If you're interested in buying some and you live within the United States or Canada, we can ship to you. We've done it to for some people already, and they've enjoyed the product very much. And she makes all her own sourdough starter. She makes everything from scratch. This is bread made from love.
Yeah. I have my own special sourdough starter. I don't do it the normal way. But someone else is not producing enough right now for me, so it's a little different. But I thought I would share with you.
I make kombucha. It's been hard to, it's been hard to get back into it because it's just been so busy on the weekends. But I will be getting back into that soon. So we'll be having kombucha sourdough in the future. Yeah, give the people a little eye candy.
Oh, it's very hot.
Oh, is it? Do you need me to hold it for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
So today I scored a Bread Theory sourdough loaf with the Bread Theory logo.
There, gotta orient this toward the camera. Yeah, there you go.
Yummy.
That really came through nice.
So, we like extra scoring on our bread. Makes it very crispy. But you know what? If you want to order bread from me and that's not your jam, tell me and I won't slice it that way.
Sure. Or if you want a custom design, as long as it's not too complex, I would bet that Amanda would...
Straight lines are better.
Straight lines? Okay.
Curves are hard.
All right.
So I just demolish it with special scissors, So,
yeah. Handmade artisanal sourdough, another way that you can support the stream. What are these going for? What is the going rate right now?
That's the hard part because it's the shipping.
Well, okay, so excluding shipping, because that can vary, especially for shipping to like Canada or something, I would imagine. But what has been the going just price for just the bread plus shipping?
Like 10.
Like $10 a loaf plus shipping, and that's a big loaf. How much do these loaves weigh?
I don't know.
Would you guess like three
Uh,
3 pounds, 5 pounds, something like that?
3 to 5 pounds.
So you're getting a lot of bread, and this is no Wonder Bread.
And
It is
yeah,
not as though you can just mash it all up into one big wad. Um,
yeah, it's not happening because it's very crusty all around.
right.
Makes excellent toast. And I venture to say in the future for Zach, it will become his own personal Panera bread bowl at some point, or I may have to make smaller ones that he can turn into bread bowls for soup.
I wouldn't say no to that.
So,
Oh, and hello, James. I didn't mean to ignore you there in the chat.
hi James.
Yeah, happy Fourth of July extravaganza.
So
We are
special.
honoring the memories of
Of
you know
bullshit.
long dead ghosts who somehow still have sway over this country by taking an unvarnished look at their legacy and their ideas.
So, I don't want to hold you guys up again. Bread,
Well, I
theory,
mean,
bread.
you can be on the stream as well if you like.
I know, but I'm baking right now.
Okay, so she's
I have
busy
things
baking.
to watch. So this is the bread theory breads. Follow me on Insta. Ouija bread. So yummy.
Oh, we eat some bread. Oh, we eat some bread. Oh, we eat some bread. That could be a theme song.
Yeah. Did you share my link? You did.
I did, yeah.
So,
Do you want me to share it again?
if you want.
Sure, I'm gonna share it
You
again.
don't have to.
Ouija bread.
It ships pretty well though. I like to ship USPS
It
because
does. Yeah,
we want to keep the post office there.
we wrap it in foil right away. Oh, Shanika
Hey,
is
Shanika.
on. Hello. It's been a
Hey,
while.
y'all. Yeah, it's been a while. It's been like forever.
How are
How y'all
you?
doing? Oh, usual, triggered, and then, have to think through it and sort of like process it and come back.
Gotcha.
Rinse, repeat. How y'all doing?
Oh, sorry, you don't have headphones. You're not gonna be able to hear
Okay.
Shanika. Do you want?
I gotta go check
You
because
gotta get back
I
to the
don't have my
bread?
timer.
Okay.
Shanika, hello, I've missed you. Sorry,
Hey,
I'm
I missed you
baking
too.
right now.
Oh, James
And
wants to get in.
I gotta show her.
I'm baked too.
Shanika, we made a bread theory loaf with the bread theory logo in the middle.
Oh my gosh. I'm
Yeah.
telling you, I'm going to get
She's-
possessed by your,
she's
this
an
is our new
artisan.
religion.
Yeah,
There
you
we
go.
go. I cannot read
The
it.
scapegoat's going to eat the bread. Yeah, let them
No.
eat bread.
James wants to
Let them
get
eat bread,
in
y'all.
his plug for pepperoni rolls as well. So if you ever decide to offer pepperoni rolls, James
if
will be
I
your
make
first
pepperoni
customer.
rolls and I freeze them and ship them to you, is this a real thing you're gonna want?
I think so. I mean, he's mentioned it virtually every stream since first bringing it up. So
What's the
might come back
topic
in a
of
little
today?
bit,
Like,
but I gotta finish
because
my
like now I
shopping.
feel like we're at school and I hope I'm prepared.
yeah. So, so we are looking at Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. We're on chapter 4. This is kind of the era leading right up to the Revolutionary War. So we're going to hear a lot about the working class during that time and how they were kind of tricked into fighting a war against the monarchy for the benefit of the owner class. So the owner class was tired of having rulers above them. They had enough of being beholden to England and the crown, and instead wanted to be rulers themselves. So it's not that they wanted everyone to be free; they just wanted themselves to be more free. So
Owner class.
they
Gotcha.
convinced the working class to fight a war for them. And arguably, capitalism is better than monarchy. There is more freedom under capitalism than monarchy. Even
What
Marx
were the
himself.
classes like? I'm kind of wanting to have a foundation in my mind of what it looked like because you said owner class, you said
Sure.
working class.
So to give you an idea, I think last time we did a stream on this, they were talking about how in Boston, it was something like 3% of people owned like 99% of the businesses in Boston, or 99% controlled 99% of the commerce. And then you have a smattering of like artisans, like, bakers, for example, or, people that do specialty sorts of work. And then everyone else is just working class. And a lot of indentured servitude, quite a bit. That was a very common way for people to get over to the United States. Is they would, they didn't have the transit fare to get across the Atlantic, so they would promise to basically be a legal slave for their whoever they sold themselves to in the New World. And most of the time, they said something like 80-90% of the time, even after they were done with their indentured servitude, they would have nothing to show for it, and they would end up destitute on the street anyway. So there's a lot of working class resentment at this time. There were some rebellions that took place. We learned about Bacon's Rebellion, which it was a mixed bag again, because both had class consciousness, like they were against the owner class. They wanted more rights. They wanted more of the share of the pie, for not be screwed over for their labor. At the same time, they really hated the Native Americans and wanted to keep them away from the English colonies. So good and bad in that, but it was ultimately put down.
Wow, that sounds a little bit like history repeated itself with a lot of people wanting trigger warning them Mexicans,
Yeah.
okay, air quotes, um, referring to like Latin people in general coming and getting jobs, immigrants, etc. And anecdote, like one of the things my cousin like got mad at me about if I'm talking about, racism and things that happen. He says, well, you never say anything bad about what Mexicans did to you. And it's like, if you're in the working class, it's different from you're in a situation that's socially
Yeah.
more accepting.
Yeah. And I mean, that's where intersectionality comes in, because people that are of the working class can be impressed in multiple ways. It could be through their class oppression. That's the case for, the millions of poor white people today. But it can also be for other things such as race, gender identity, sexual orientation, just being a woman. All sorts of ways that you can also have a grievance against the colonial, patriarchal society that we live in.
That's it.
So yeah. So the
That's,
idea is
that's then I keep committing that I keep, have to forget not to do it and remember not to do it. So yeah,
yeah.
sorry.
Oh, no problem at all. Yeah, it's just that
I'll be
yeah,
offering
yeah.
several apologies and free pepperoni rolls and French onion bread like every half an hour, just so you know that I
Oh
was
my.
apologizing for the fact that I'm a female.
Wow.
Really taking up space, breathing all
uh,
the air, cracking my neck. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Not at all.
I love y'all. I miss y'all.
Yeah, it's been a long time. I'm glad to have you back on the program.
Oh, and I'm going to buy some bread. So
Awesome.
don't
Oh,
forget.
and look, I was just about to say Zen was going to join us, and here she is. Let's see if she can get her camera working, and we can have her on the program as well. I don't see nor hear you. Oh, there
Hey.
you are.
Hi.
A little bit of a lag.
Wi-Fi trouble here, but I think I got it straight.
No problem.
It's nice to see
Glad to hear
you.
it. Good to
Nice to
see
see
you.
You got on my favorite color.
Thank you. I love this shirt. It's cozy. It's soft. It's thin, lightweight, so it doesn't kill me in the heat. I love it. It even says "Stay chill." It's a message both to the soul
Nice.
and to the body.
Very cool.
All right. There you
All
go.
right. How you doing tonight, Zan? Trisha.
Doing okay. A little overheated out here, but you know what's new in the desert.
Yeah. It's pretty hot. Pretty hot where I'm at too. It's peaking up towards, I guess it's in the low 80s now that the sun is going down, but it got up towards the 90s today. So, not fun weather.
I'm kind
I'm
of
over here
jealous.
abusing the air conditioner. Sorry.
It's all good.
Sorry. I was about to say something silly as usual. I'm ripping a hole in the ozone layer all by myself. My air conditioner.
Oh, I mean,
Nothing to
it's
see here,
an
folks.
essential where I'm at too. So,
Same. It was like around 100 earlier. I'm not sure. It's probably only gone down to about 98 or so right
Oof.
now. But the air conditioner is at least keeping it down to about 90 inside.
well,
Okay.
that's a little more tolerable.
How the fur babies? They panting? They good?
Well, yes to both. Panting but good.
Hey, how's it going,
Say hi.
guys?
He's so pretty.
Oh,
God.
you have to knock the laptop over. There we go. Yeah, the cats are over there laying down sleeping.
Nice.
Hi, James.
Cool.
Saw the comments. Oh,
All right.
goodness.
So, as you may recall, when last we left off, we were in the lead up to the Revolutionary War. So we're kind of looking at the working class conditions beforehand, and the leverage points that the ruling or the owner class used to. I think Trisha has frozen on us, unfortunately. There.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Okay. Well, we're gonna get into the chapter, and hopefully she'll be able to reset
Okay.
and join us again. Yeah, so here we are, 1740s, the New York Tenant Uprising. I'm going to back it up just a couple seconds. Let's see. Here she is again.
You know me, I got to bloop out into the.
No.
You're out there in the desert. My goodness.
Yep.
You must feel free, just like being in all that space.
I think she's losing the signal again.
Oh, damn it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the white out here is kind of frustrating. But
yeah,
at least it is pretty out here. I'm up in the mountains, so I'm in high desert. Down in the and stuff, but still hot as fuck.
Nice.
Gotcha.
But beautiful. Got real lots of trees.
Okay. I hope she can not be choppy. I don't know how to. Man.
I think we're just gonna have to roll with it, and she'll have to contribute as she can. So let's get into the chapter now. I'm gonna back it up just a little bit, couple seconds here, and get into it.
And therefore every free state hath a right by its laws to discourage the possession of property. In the countryside where most people lived, there was a similar conflict of poor against rich, one which political leaders would use to mobilize the population against England, granting some benefits for the rebellious poor and many more for themselves in the process. The tenant riots in New Jersey in the 1740s, the New York tenant uprisings of the 1750s and 1760s in the Hudson Valley, and the rebellion in northeastern New York that led to the carving of Vermont out of New York State were all more than sporadic rioting. They were long-lasting social movements, highly organized, involving the creation of counter-governments. They were aimed at a handful of rich landlords, but with landlords far away, they often had to direct their anger against farmers who had leased the disputed land from the owners. See Edward Countryman's pioneering work on rural rebellion. Just as the Jersey rebels had broken into jails to free their friends, rioters in the Hudson Valley rescued prisoners from the sheriff, and one time took the sheriff himself as prisoner. The tenants were seen as, quote, chiefly the dregs of the people, and the posse that the sheriff of Albany County led to Bennington in 1771 included the privileged top of the local power structure. The land rioters saw their battle as poor against rich. A witness at a rebel leader's trial in New York in 1776 said that the farmers evicted by the landlords, quote, had an equitable title but could not be defended in a course of law because they were poor, and poor men were always oppressed by the rich. Ethan Allen's Green Mountain Rebels in Vermont described themselves as, quote, a poor people fatigued in settling a wilderness country, and their opponents as, quote, a number of attorneys and other gentlemen with all their tackle of ornaments and compliments and French finesse, unquote.
So we see a lot of civil unrest leading up to the Revolutionary War, and that, I mean, that should be a pretty good indication of how terrible the conditions were for the working class if they kept finding the need to revolt again and again. And they even talked about, he was just saying that they were setting up parallel governments. It's a technique called dual power, where you just, you know, basically set up the institutions that you wish to see. So if your government is not providing food for everyone, you set up a mutual aid group that can do that instead. If they're not providing security, whatever it is they're not providing, you set up a parallel government. And eventually, the idea is either the government gets in line and follows your model, or they become irrelevant.
Yep.
So,
I like that he pointed out that there was also tenants who were
hmm
revolting because of
hmm
the landlords exploiting them.
oh
That
yeah,
it's like,
tenant farmers.
sound familiar? Yeah.
And just to think, there could be some 20-year-old today thinking that that's a new thing.
hmm
Like
Yeah,
they're
right.
hearing it for the first time, saying, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely true. But yeah, I mean, the tenant farmers were in a really bad situation. They were basically, only not slaves in on paper. Like they would become so indebted to the landlords by design that they would never be able to leave um, their farm, never come away with any uh, profit for themselves, and just end up more and more in debt. Same thing with
So
sharecroppers. Really terrible systems of exploitation.
like a de facto indentured servant, but without, like you said, the benefits of inheriting land or a chance to have your name
Yep.
on something.
Yeah, because they
Yeah.
definitely didn't own any of that land. It all was owned by these wealthy landlords, basically the American aristocracy. Even though that was not an official title for anybody, that's basically how it behaved.
Are we having like now kind of the divisions of what did you call them? The strata, like of society.
Mm-hmm.
Forget the word, but yes, like you said, the aristocracy is starting to do this, and
Yeah.
then somebody else is gonna. Yeah, it's like
Well, I mean,
it becomes in fashion.
under capitalism, there are two basic classes. There's the working class, and those can be people that even make a lot of money. Those can be doctors. Those can be lawyers that work for a law firm that don't have an independent practice of their own. Those can be people that are well off. Um, and at the same time, you have the petit bourgeois, which tends to be small business owners, people that may run a laundromat or be the lawyer that has an independent practice that has lawyers underneath them. These sorts of people, they don't have as much power as, like, say, captains of industry and stuff like that. They can't completely influence an election on their own, let's say, but they still are the owner class, and during times of revolt will side with the owners, because they themselves are owners. And then you just have the bourgeoisie, which is the owner class, the ones that have all the lobbyists to make laws in their favor, that always come out on top when it comes to legal matters, say like a contract dispute, or a tenant that's it's not doing what they're supposedly supposed to be doing. So, so yeah. So people will talk about, upper, middle, lower class. These are more or less bourgeois terms. They don't really serve much purpose, other than because like for example, the middle class. Every person has a different example or a different definition of what the middle class is. Is it just people in the three middle of the quintiles? Like you divide the income of the country into five parts, and whoever just happens to be in those middle, that middle 60%, those are the middle class. Well, that doesn't really, I mean, that shifts all the time. That doesn't really tell you anything about these people. It's just
Yeah,
a way of looking at income.
yeah.
Um,
Because depending on who's going to be in whose same boat, who's going to side with who
right.
politically,
Right. Yeah, it doesn't say anything about that either. Because you
yeah,
could have a very poor business owner who is more likely to side with other business owners when things get rough than their own workers. And you may have doctors and lawyers or other, high powered people that are going to side with the working class, more likely, because they themselves don't have control over the means of production, even though they benefit greatly from it.
This is one of those things that really exemplifies that old saying of if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to fucking repeat it. And here we are repeating
Oh, absolutely.
it. And a lot of it's because these people that we have in office are incredibly fucking ignorant and they haven't studied history. Or they would have been well aware that if they keep pushing shit in the direction that's pushing it and fucking people out of their material conditions being met, that is precisely what leads to revolt and their revolution.
Yeah.
And like currently these dumbasses are talking about we need to lower wages to help with inflation. We're like, excuse me? No, you're going in the wrong direction there, buddy. They're literally driving people to revolution.
Absolutely. Yeah, and Marx said something to effect of capitalism will always sow its own seeds of destruction. It always pushes the conditions that eventually people just snap and they cannot deal with anymore, and it's either die or revolt. And it does seem like we're getting pushed in that direction right now. I would agree with that. Oh, by the way, thanks for the follow, Driving Alone with Mask. We're talking about people's history of the United States tonight, specifically the era around the Revolutionary War. Yep, that's fireworks you hear from outside my window, James. They've started already. It's going to be another war zone type situation in my neighborhood. It was pretty bad last night. I think it's probably going to be even worse tonight. It's just going to be constant noise all night long. That's how my neighborhood is. But anyway, getting back to the topic, what I wanted to say was that it seems that the rich more are concerned with, like how they're gonna have like their post-apocalyptic bunker or their specialty cars and private security forces. They see that it's coming. They are just preparing for it as if it's going to be the zombie uprising and they're going to be the survivors, basically. And, all us proletariat, we're going to be the zombie hordes, trying to take what's rightfully theirs and whatnot. So I think they see that it's coming. I think they just don't care because they believe that they can insulate themselves from any consequences with their money. And I mean, they have so far in their lives, so I guess there's no reason for them to believe otherwise.
The second that the C word started, I don't know if we're allowed to say it, but the second that situation started, like quite a few stars like left the country, like literally upped and stayed at their house in some other country somewhere and announced their departure. They can do that, but this, I mean, the zombie thing sounds like we're going to be the ones who are conscious.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that's the ironic part. They're always the heroes of their own narrative. They believe, to some degree, that they are the masters of the world, rightfully so, and that everyone else just needs to bow down to their majesty. But yeah.
Just a reminder, we outnumber those motherfuckers.
Yep. And we always will, because that's how capitalism works.
Yep.
It is structurally set up as a pyramid. You have to have more people for each layer below to support the layers above. So
that sounds more like a guillotine.
Yeah, it is. It's a little bit of a guillotine shape if you just turn it on its side. Yeah. All right, let's move on in the chapter here.
And hungry farmers in the Hudson Valley turned to the British for support against the American landlords. The Green Mountain rebels did the same. But as the conflict with Britain intensified, the colonial leaders of the movement for independence, aware of the tendency of poor tenants to side with the British in their anger against the rich, adopted policies to win over people in the countryside. In North Carolina, a powerful movement of white farmers was organized against wealthy and commercials in the period from 1766 to 1771, exactly those years when, in the cities of the Northeast, agitation was growing against the British, crowding out class issues. The movement in North Carolina was called the Regulator Movement, and it consisted, says Marvin L. Michael Kay, a specialist in the history of that movement, of, quote, class-conscious white farmers in the West who attempted to democratize local governments in their respective counties, unquote. The regulators referred to themselves as, quote, poor industrious peasants, as laborers, the wretched poor, oppressed by rich and powerful, designing monsters. The regulators saw that a combination of wealth and political power ruled North Carolina and denounced those officials, quote, whose highest study is the promotion of their wealth. They resented the tax system, which was especially burdensome on the poor, and the combination of merchants and lawyers who worked in the courts to collect debts from the harassed farmers. In the western counties where the movement developed, only a small percentage of the households had slaves, and 41% of these were concentrated to take one sample western county in less than 2% of the households. The regulators did not represent
So there you go again. 41% of the slaves concentrated in 2% of the households. So for the people in the South, the people that for some dumb reason still uphold the rebel flag as though that represents them or their personal heritage at all. No, most of you people don't have lineage that goes back to slaveholders. Most of you people were not just as repressed, but very close to as oppressed as the slaves that your nation was trying to uphold in the Confederacy. And that's the way the economy worked. If you were not a wealthy landowner with slaves, you basically didn't have much to do. There's a reason that southern cities took a much longer time to develop than northern cities, because they just didn't have to. And they didn't have to develop new technology because they could just throw human labor at whatever they wanted. And, you're making all the profit. It's just pure profit. You have to spend a little bit of money to make sure that your slaves don't starve to death, I guess. But that's about it. So it was an incredibly profitable system. The average Southerner, even though they were something like a quarter of the population compared to the North, had over twice the average wealth of the average Northerner. So considering that again, 2% of the people own slaves at all, that means that those 2% were so obscenely wealthy that they had twice as much wealth as the average Northerner, who, all that wealth is spread out amongst a much larger population. So, yeah.
Especially considering that a large amount of their quote-unquote wealth was people that they owned.
Well, absolutely. It was entirely developed by people that they owned. It was basically human machinery in their eyes.
And that sort of free labor in perpetuity,
Mm-hmm.
In addition.
Yep. Yeah, so that notion that they throw out every once in a while that, slavery would have ended by itself because, it just wasn't as profitable or innovative. It doesn't matter if it wasn't as innovative. It didn't have to be. If you can get people
really
to
make
make you money forever.
Sorry.
Yeah, once in a while I hear that argument come up, and it's just like, no, it never would have ended for economic reasons because it's incredibly profitable for the few that can afford to partake in it. So, yeah. So James says a lot of people in West Virginia have rebel flags, which is funny because the state was created from people not agreeing with the South. Yeah, West Virginia split off from Virginia in protest of the Confederacy. So, I mean, you see rebel flags in Minnesota, and I think we were barely a state at that point. There was not many of us, but the few troops that we did contribute to the Civil War were all to the North. So. In fact, we have a Confederate flag displayed in the Capitol building that was stolen from a Virginia company. And every so often, the Virginia historians are like, oh, can we have our flag back? I'm like, no, we stole that fair and square. You're not getting it back. This is a symbol of us saying, giving a big middle finger to the Confederacy.
Right on.
So, So
So I
yeah.
think like this again hails back to the ignorance to history too, because a lot of these motherfuckers that fly Confederate flags are like, yeah, it's part of my history and all this shit, and they try to claim that it's not a representation of slavery, and it's like, excuse me, how about you go look up some quotes from the motherfucker who designed it, who literally
Yeah.
said this flag fucking represents our fight to keep our slaves.
Yeah.
Not
That's not
not to
verbatim,
mention.
but that he was like,
Yeah, I mean, not to mention that the so-called rebel flag was not the flag for the entire Confederacy. It was a very specific flag. It was a flag of a Virginia battalion,
Hmm.
and it was resurrected specifically to oppose. Um, I believe it was when they resurrected it to oppose the civil rights era. So black people being enfranchised with more voting rights. So that was not just a random symbol they plucked from history. They were saying, you know, you all better watch out, or we're going to wage war on you again if you
Yeah.
think that you deserve rights to even to vote. Um,
Yeah, like don't they always like have a move like the 1-2 punch of, doing something, then hiding it behind another thing and then making everybody forget. And if you just like have that propaganda out there for a few decades, the people that knew the truth will die off, the new people will be confused, and you can like run that same scam again. Like
mhm.
that's just the whole entire, it's, it's like a yeah, it's crazy. It's like a casino or something.
Yeah, yeah, right.
part of why real history doesn't get taught in schools, because you know they would rather whitewash the fuck out of it and try to redefine what things were instead of just telling the fucking truth about it being trash.
That's it. That's it.
Mhm.
Because this thing about the flag, I mean, if you add in the fact that at some point, flags were considered like everybody was like forced to get one or encouraged to buy one. Like there was this huge push for people, and then that's when the Pledge of Allegiance was invented. And
Mhm.
then you have everybody pledging allegiance to the flag since they're little kids. So
Mhm.
you have image after action after something resonating with people and just getting this weird idea and they don't know where it's coming from, and it's the
Absolutely, yeah.
programming.
Yeah, eventually
Yeah,
it just
that's
becomes
wild.
the tradition, and you can't fight tradition. Yeah.
A lot of people don't even realize, okay, a flag is a military standard.
Hmm.
If you're not a member of the military, guess what? You owe no allegiance to a military standard. It's
Hmm.
all fucking conditioning that they're doing by even making kids say the Pledge of Allegiance
Yep.
Mhm.
to a fucking military standard at the start of every day.
Not to mention the under God part where you might
Oh yeah,
even either you're like an atheist at that age or you at least like are now getting brainwashed to feel like
yeah,
God and country are one thing.
right. Yeah, you have no idea what's going on. But that part was only added as a response to the Red Scare. So
Hmm.
they were afraid of communism, and the godless commies were going to come and indoctrinate us. So they added under God to the money and to the pledge to show that
Yep.
we are
Oh,
a God fearing nation, not a communist state. Um,
Yep.
right.
I believe it
but I
was
just
like
want to
mid
take
50s,
Yeah,
like
about around the
55
50s. That was like the
56.
height of the Red Scare, Cold War bullshit. So here again, this is the national flag of the Confederacy. That why they call it the stars and bars. These are the bars. There's the stars. That was the original one. This one here is the Confederate battle flag, the Southern Cross version of the battle flag. The design of the stars and bars varied over the following 2 years, um, and then they had this flag, the stainless banner, and eventually, um, yeah, they had another version, but they're not going to show it in this particular article on Britannica. It looks like, but
Hmm.
yeah, it has not always been that or any version of that. It started out very different. Why is my thing not scrolling? Anyway,
Yeah. And at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding. Like the white folk that adopt that flag or have it tattooed on them will just be, ranting and saying the N word and calling everybody. So it's like you can say all you want that, oh, we didn't mean this and we didn't mean that, but you're your descendants heard
Yeah.
you loud and clear.
Well,
Heard
they
you loud
always
and clear. The dog whistle.
they cloak it in. Oh, this is our tradition. All you have to do is say tradition to do what? Tradition to do what? Tradition of what? Slavery, as was written into virtually every state that seceded's secession papers. We're doing this because we believe white people are superior and that black people deserve to be enslaved. Point blank.
And I'm here
So
to tell you,
Dak,
tradition is nothing but peer pressure from dead people. Fuck
it's very
tradition.
good.
I love
Absolutely.
that quote.
Yeah, it's very good.
That's it.
I didn't come up with it. I can't remember where, but it's fucking true.
Yeah, I've heard that before. It's very good though. Yeah. So Dak Apollyon says, I was extremely confused by the tattoos of a customer last night. They were a Confederate flag, an American flag, and a native pride flag. Like, really, pick a lane. How do you have all those three? The two countries that fought each other over a civil war, plus the ones that have always been oppressed by those two countries. It's like, whose side are you on at that point?
I got the answer. It's tattoo therapy. It's like he was trying to get rid of all the racism in his
Maybe
his
that's
body.
it.
So
Maybe that's it. He's
the
just gonna
stabbing
pour it
of
all.
the tattoo just, de-racialized him, and now he's, married to a black chick.
Yeah.
Visiting Guam.
Yeah, that person's definitely confused.
Absolutely. Yeah. It'd be interesting to find out the actual history of that, why that person chose those particular ones.
It's representing him. All this tattoo clusterfuck.
That's right.
What the hell?
What would the tattoo artists have said? Like, that would have
I
been
know.
a good story at the end of the night. Like,
Right. Like, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if you got it all at the same place, because a lot of tattoo places will not do racist tattoos. So you'd have to find one that both does racist tattoos and native pride tattoos. So
is it crazy? Like, I feel like the most tattooed and like green hair and spiky people are like the coolest and the least racist. Like, you see them all the time in Chicago and stuff, walking around and stuff. They'd be like,
That's right.
"Ooh."
Yeah, because they've had enough of America too. They understand what's up.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on a little bit in the text.
Servants or slaves, but they did speak for small owners, squatters, and tenants. A contemporary account of the regulator movement in Orange County describes the situation. Quote, "Thus were the people of Orange insulted by the sheriff, robbed and plundered, neglected and condemned by the representatives, and abused by the magistracy. Obliged to pay fees, regulated only by the avarice of the officer, obliged to pay a tax which they believed went to enrich and aggrandize a few who lorded it over them continually, and from all these evils they saw no way to escape, for the men in power and legislation were the men whose interest it was to oppress and make gain of the laborer." In that county in the 1760s, the regulators organized to prevent the collection of taxes or the confiscation of property of tax delinquents. Officials said, quote, "An absolute insurrection of dangerous tendency has broke out in Orange County," and made military plans to suppress it. At one point, 700 armed farmers forced the release of 2 arrested regulator leaders. The regulators petitioned the government on their grievances in 1768, citing, quote, "the unequal chances the poor and the weak have in contentions with the rich and the powerful." In another county, Anson, a local militia colonel complained of, quote, "the unparalleled tumults, insurrections, and commotions which at present distract this country." At one point, 100 men broke up the proceedings at a county court, but they also tried to elect farmers to the assembly, asserting, quote, "that a majority of our assembly is composed of lawyers, clerks, and others in connection with them." In 1770, there was a large-scale riot in Hillsborough, North Carolina, in which they disrupted a court, forced the judge to flee, beat 3 lawyers and 2 merchants, and looted stores. The result of all this was the assembly passed some mild reform legislation, but also an act, quote, to prevent riots and tumults, unquote, and the governor prepared to crush them militarily. In May of 1771, there was a decisive battle in which several thousand regulators were defeated by a disciplined army using cannon. 6 regulators were hanged. Kay says that in the 3 western counties of Orange, Anson, and Rowan, where the regulator movement was concentrated, it had the support of 6,000 to 7,000 men out of a total white taxable population of about 8,000.
Whoa. That's a big
One
movie.
consequence of this bitter conflict is that only a minority of the people in the regulator counties seem to have participated as patriots in the Revolutionary War. Most of them probably remained neutral. Fortunately for the revolutionary movement, the key battles were being fought in the north, and here, in the cities, the colonial leaders had a divided white population. They could win over the mechanics, who were a kind of middle class, who had a stake in the fight against England, who faced competition from English manufacturers. The biggest problem was to keep the propertyless people, who were unemployed and hungry in the crisis following the French War, under control. In Boston, the economic grievances of the lower classes mingled with anger against the British and exploded in mob violence. The leaders of the independence movement wanted to use that mob energy against England, but also to contain it so that it would not demand too much from them. When riots against the Stamp Act swept Boston in 1767, they were analyzed by the commander of the British forces in North America, General Thomas Gage, as follows, quote, "The Boston mob, raised first by the instigation of many of the principal inhabitants, allured by plunder, rose shortly after of their own accord, attacked, robbed, and destroyed several houses, and amongst others that of the lieutenant governor. People then began to be terrified at the spirit they had raised, to perceive that popular fury was not to be guided, and each individual feared he might be the next victim to their rapacity. The same fears spread through the other provinces, and there has been as much pains taken since to prevent insurrections of the people as before to excite them." Gage's comment suggests that leaders of the movement against the Stamp Act had instigated crowd action, but then became frightened by the thought that it might be directed against their wealth too. At this time, the top 10% of Boston's taxpayers held about 66% of Boston's taxable wealth, while the lowest 30% of the taxpaying population had no taxable property at all.
There you have it. Vast
Landlords.
income inequalities, perpetuated largely by landlords, for sure, leads to a whole lot of social unrest and instability. It is the inequality that causes the crime, not the crime that causes inequality, as so many very confused conservatives believe.
Right.
You know what's weird? Like the word landlord. I mean, it's obviously like telling you that the person is, the property, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's make it. They're kind of like in the same economic boat as the people that they're renting to in a certain way. They're like maybe half a level above, but obviously they're given the title lord, and they actually probably feel like, you know what I mean, to make sure that they oppress, have slumlords, have all that type of stuff to like really encourage the capitalism.
Oh yeah, and I mean landlording. It's no coincidence that is the term, because it is a vestige of the feudal era. That is how feudalism works. You make money by owning land, and so then whatever is produced on that land, you take a portion of because you own. You don't contribute any labor. You don't do any advertising. You don't do much of anything. You just collect, and that is basically how landlording works now. It's just a holdover from that era. So, like landlording, that's not a job. They don't provide anything. They somehow have convinced themselves that they provide housing, but they don't build the houses. They don't usually even maintain the houses, unless it's a very small landlording operation, in which case they're providing property management, which actually is a service, but just the owning and getting money because you are an owner, that's not a job. That's just you happen to luck into a title to a piece of land or to a building, and you extract rent from it. That's the long and short of it. But you don't provide a single thing. just a parasite.
Goodness. And then of course when land or housing becomes scarce,
Hmm.
you can start to raise the prices, you can corner the market, you can
Hmm.
yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's a whole section of TikTok called Landlord TikTok, and it is one of the most disgusting and yet hilarious parts of TikTok altogether. Like the cognitive dissonance of some of these landlords is just astounding. They look down their nose at every one of their tenants. They gloss over all of their concerns about, not having running water at certain times, or not having proper utilities, or not fixing a window, or all this stuff. And they just act incredibly entitled when people have had enough, and they're like, I'm going to withhold rent until you fix my window that you said you'd fix when I moved in. These sorts of things. But
Look
it's,
at how
it's
many
pretty
people are
disgusting.
allowed to screw other people over without any recompense. I'm sorry. I think I cut somebody off.
No, not at all. Keep
It's
going.
just like I mean, it's so universal, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's getting worse right
And
now because there's companies like Zillow that started out as a place to list properties for sale that
yeah.
they themselves have become so huge and amassed so much profits that they have started buying up the best houses that come available on the market themselves and then flipping them for a much higher price, artificially inflating the cost of housing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're literally overbidding the asking price to knock anybody else out of the running in
Mm-hmm.
order to stop from being able to own homes, and then turn around and making it where only incredibly fucking wealthy people can even afford to buy them. And on top of it, we've got landlords going, "Well, see, this shit's going up. I guess I have to raise the price of my rent." Like the house about an hour away from here that Rob and Emily have rented for the last 5 years. When they first moved in, I think it was like 1,300 a month they were paying, and then it jacked up to 1,500 a month and 1,800 a month. Well, they just moved out of there last week. The landlord's already got it relisted for 2,225
Oh,
fucking month.
jeez.
yep,
So it's damn near doubled
Cause
since
they
we moved
can.
down here 5 years ago.
Yeah,
that's the game.
and that's the thing. This. To me, this is symptomatic of our economy just kind of, in one instance, eating itself, but then also regressing to earlier forms of economics. So all these firms, these BlackRock and like you said, Zillow, instead of providing any sort of good or service anymore, they're just regressing to being landlords, to just making money by owning things.
Hmm.
Uh, and at the same time, this makes property more expensive, as you say, because it
Yeah.
becomes more scarce, which jacks up the prices further, which makes them more money, which makes it more scarce, which jacks up. This is just going to be a
Yeah.
never-ending cycle until finally the whole thing crashes. And and
And don't forget, like purposely letting repairs go bad so that when
mhm,
it gets to the critical mass of being able to like do a refurnish of everything, there's that, price hike, and all the publicity about, look,
mhm,
we're renovating,
yep,
right? Because you let the mold chew up half the apartment and
right,
kill several people, and now you want to make another dollar, and you did it on purpose.
hmm,
So
hmm, yeah. I mean, there have been times in say New York City where things have gotten so bad that slumlords would set their own properties on fire just
yeah,
to collect the insurance money. Doesn't matter if there's people inside. They saw no way out, and in St. Paul we just instituted rent control, so you can no longer jack up the price of rent by more than 3% a year, which still it's not as though wages are going up on average by 3% a year, so it's still going to outpace wages at some point. But
goodness.
if the value of properties just keeps going up and up and up to the point where the property taxes start cutting into the landlord's profit, who knows? You might start see a bunch of mysterious fires
Yeah,
consuming some of these basically tenements, some of the
like
lowest rent areas.
like my first apartment that I got last year of college in Chicago, it was
Hmm.
really close to the train, like walking distance from the train. So you know that's gonna jack up the price. And it was also close to the lake. So
Hmm.
you know that that's gonna jack up the price. But the
Hmm.
actual apartment was it was like a little expensive, but it was also a what do you call it? Not SRO, but um what's the word I'm looking for? Like a small apartment. Say
Oh,
I,
efficiency or
yeah, something like efficiency
yeah,
studio.
studio.
And
Yeah, yeah.
I had to sleep on the couch facing
Hmm.
the in the winter, sleep on the couch facing the stove and leaving the
Oh
stove, I mean
wow,
the oven open and like pumping
wow.
out heat. And the that's what I was telling you, the I can't get my words together, but there was mold in the closet. And it was like, and he just told me just spray kills. Landlord's name was Riza from Ukraine, maybe. Just spray the kills. Just get the kills and just keep spraying it. That
I
was
was,
the answer to everything.
uh,
So yeah, that was kind of messed up.
That does.
you said his name was Riza. I was
RZA,
gonna
yeah, yeah. And
like
I quickly told him like, you be like Wu Tang. He gave me
yeah,
that
that's
look
what I
like
was gonna say.
he's heard it 18,000 times.
Uh, I would have been disappointed if the Wu Tang Clan had turned to landlording.
Right.
Uh, yeah, that's funny, James. You saying Rob was keeping him from getting rich, right?
Well,
Uh,
technically them, not him. It's a landlording company that
yeah. Oh, right. Yeah.
that
The
property.
Zillow.
Even more faceless.
So to be fair, honestly, that company is probably fucking over the person that actually owns the house because I highly doubt that their payments to that individual have
Hmm.
gone up with how much they're hiking up the rent on the
Sure.
renters.
Sure.
They just are increasing their own profit margin.
So
Yeah, it's
Trish,
getting
like how
bad.
many stages? I'm trying to imagine. Like you got the landlord, but then it sounds like you got like two or three more, stages of people just, grabbing the money as it flows down, right?
Yep, property management companies tend to do that a lot.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Yeah, they can be very parasitical too, and try and get away with the least amount of repairs, and the most amount of profit. Um, so yeah, basically not being that much better than a landlord. Um, yeah, it's a bad situation because who gets caught up in all of this is it's all of the working class people that everybody needs a place to live. So the fact that we commodify our housing market and make it something that is an investment tool for so many Americans, um, event it just leaves a whole bunch of people out in the cold and literally out in the cold. And the more people that get put out and get into situations where they just cannot keep up with rent anymore, like something's got to happen. Um, they're gonna have to put their anger somewhere. So yeah, it's hard
It
to
might have
say.
a cocktail.
It might be. It might be. Then again, homeless people are traditionally very weak politically because they're struggling so hard just to survive, and they basically have no rights, no human rights at all. People, there's people that murder homeless people on the regular, and those crimes tend to go unsolved. Police do it too, beat up and murder homeless people, never any consequences. Um, and of course it's nearly impossible for them to vote, so they don't even have that as an option for getting any recourse. So it could just end up with being masses of homeless people that are just continuing to be repressed.
Yeah.
You ain't
Like
kidding
there's a
about
whole.
the
I mean,
death by cop
I'm
part
sorry.
either.
Oh, absolutely.
Say
But
that
I
again,
mean,
Trish.
You're not killing it, or you're not kidding about the death by cop part because I've seen a lot of that in wealthy areas of Florida. That literally the cops at the millionaires and billionaires' behest, they will try to run the homeless out of town, and if they get them out of town, they feed them to the mangroves.
hmm
One of my friends actually witnessed cops poisoning homeless people and, you know, making them fucking disappear and was scared shitless for himself because he was, living out of his car and he was like, oh, fuck. Like,
Yep.
who the fuck do you even try to report that to when it's the cops doing it?
right, exactly. I mean, and all of this shows just that this system has no answers for any of these problems. When the police force itself is perpetuating it, like you say, there's no one you can turn to, and you can do band-aid solutions like rent control, or um, trying to make sure that landlords have to set aside 10% of their units as low income, and these sorts of very temporary small solutions. But when it
Hmm.
comes down to it, the problem is capitalism. The problem is that people are making money off of a very basic human necessity, and that's shelter. Uh, so I mean, you have to have winners and losers in capitalism, but if you lose
Yeah.
in the housing market, you could be dead, like
Yeah.
pretty easily.
That's why there's no actual help for the homeless other than what,
Oh yeah.
regular citizens like organize, or somebody, some church, takes up that role or does it or whatever, because
Hmm.
the state's not going to do it.
Absolutely.
You know.
But I covered a really horrible PragerU documentary on solutions to homelessness. And their solution, of course, was, make them jump through a bunch of hoops, have to be sober to get housing, have to get a job to get housing, all these requirements, and then they're given housing. But it's been shown that the number one best and most effective solution to homelessness is give them a house. Just give them a house, no strings attached, a place to live. Provide services if they need mental health treatment, or drug counseling treatment, or any other sort of treatment. Give them access to those services, or at least transportation to go get those services. And that, more than any other thing, has been shown to get people off the street and keep them off the street the very longest.
Right?
Um,
Do they
so
not
that's
realize that one of the best ways to help people with drug addiction is providing them housing? It, you can't just snowball and compound the problem and be like, fucking fix it yourself if you want any
Yeah.
help, motherfucker.
right,
That's not how that works. A
right.
lot of times people are drinking heavily or using drugs to be able to cope with being homeless.
Exactly.
The solution is not to
Right.
tell them you can't fucking have a
Right.
shelter of any fucking sort unless you are
Unless you
able
meet
to
these
get sober.
requirements. Yeah, well, I mean, the problem is they start with a faulty premise. They start ass backwards. They think that drug abuse is what leads most people to be homeless, rather than being homeless is what leads to most drug abuse, because you're trying to cope with your objectively pretty horrible life. Um,
Mhm.
and being able to be robbed and hurt by virtually anyone that comes by with no recourse. Yeah, a lot of people are going to turn to self-medication. That's just a fact of it. So saying that you have to reverse that before you reverse the conditions that led to that is just asinine, and it's been shown to not be nearly as effective.
I mean,
But
the
yeah.
cause of homelessness is getting kicked out, and it just
Right.
has to do with whose name was on the lease, what struggle ensued, which person, crossed the other person, and which parent decided to kick their kid out, or a
Well,
lot of
sure.
times, the kid is gay and the parent kicks them out, so then
Oh
they're on the
yeah,
street
there's a lot
or
of that
whatever.
too.
So there's the whole thing. I mean, but yeah, if we, just like you were saying with the flag, if we like purposely, erase parts of history and look at it from our little special perspective and accept it, you won't see that part where, you're getting, like I keep telling you, like my situation in 2009, what you said about the property management plus the attorney playing hide and go seek, running down the clock, and then issuing me the get out of town order. Like this stuff happens, has nothing to do, like you said, has nothing to do with your own personal failings as a person. Like that's the first lie.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
These
Absolutely.
motherfuckers want to act like being poor and destitute is somehow a fucking personality trait.
Dang.
Yeah, that sucks that she cut out right at that point.
Yeah.
What I was going to say, though, was that, I mean, a lot of it is just not having people that are able to support you in your life, and something happens.
Yeah. Or of
My
course, the people
wife,
that were supposed to support you were the very ones that decided not to support you, like a parent or
absolutely
something.
that too.
Yeah.
But like, Amanda lost her job a little over a month, about a month and a half ago. She's finally gotten work again, but during that time, had we not had support directly from my parents, we could have faced homelessness too. It would all depend on how, charitable our landlords were feeling. But we certainly could have gotten in terrible financial. We had no good financial options. It's either default on a bunch of credit cards and a bunch of debt, or don't have a place to live, or don't have food.
Yep.
Like, we would have had to make some pretty tough choices had it not been for the support of my parents. So
Yep.
there's millions of people that are not as fortunate as I to have parents that are in a position to help. For one thing, they were able to help us through, and also willing to support them through something like that. But it could happen to anyone. Anyone could lose their job at any point. We live in an at-will employment country. You could get fired because you come in late and you forget to call ahead, or the manager just doesn't like you, or they're trying to extract favors out of you and you're not down with that. Um, any number of reasons that you can be fired, and so it could happen to virtually anyone. The average American is only about $800-900 away from financial ruin. So that's all it would take, is an unexpected $800-900 bill, and they could be out on the street too, if not for, support from somewhere.
I'm so glad you're teaching this, like teaching history like this with the Howard Zinn and stuff, because like the invisible hand of people, the government doing shit, like that's the
Hmm.
thing that if you don't know about that, like if you're not aware of that, forget about your political party or whatever your opinion are. Like start there, like knowing that your actual American government that you feel so good about because it's the best place in the world, yada yada, is
Sure.
actually purposely mind fucking you.
So
And
false. Yes,
it's like
absolutely.
it's a lot to take, and a lot of people, like you keep saying, the cognitive dissonance, they just can't take it. They just can't stop and you know be honest. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's move on in tonight's chapter.
The propertyless could not vote, and so, like blacks, women, Indians, could not participate in town meetings. This included sailors, journeymen, apprentices, servants. Dick Herder, a student of Boston mob actions in the Revolutionary period, calls the revolutionary leadership, quote, the Sons of Liberty type drawn from the middling interest and well-to-do merchants, a hesitant leadership, quote, wanting to spur action against Great Britain, yet worrying about maintaining control over the crowds at home. It took the Stamp Act crisis to make this leadership aware of its dilemma. A political group in Boston called the Loyal Nine, merchants, distillers, ship owners, and master craftsmen who opposed the Stamp Act, organized a procession in August 1765 to protest it. They put 50 master craftsmen at the head, but needed to mobilize ship workers from the North End and mechanics and apprentices from the South End. 2,000 or 3,000 were in the processions. Negroes were excluded. They marched to the home of the stamp master and burned his effigy. But after the gentlemen who organized the demonstration left, the crowd went further and destroyed some of the stamp master's property. These were, as one of the Loyal Nine said, quote, amazingly inflamed people, unquote. The Loyal Nine seemed taken aback by the direct assault on the wealthy furnishings of the stamp master. The rich set up armed patrols. Now a town meeting was called, and the same leaders who had planned the demonstration denounced the violence and disavowed the actions of the crowd. As more demonstrations were planned for November 1st, 1765, when the Stamp Act was to go into effect, and for Pope's Day, November 5th, steps were taken to keep things under control. A dinner was given for certain leaders of the rioters to win them over, and when the Stamp Act was repealed due to overwhelming resistance, the conservative leaders severed their connections with the rioters. They held annual celebrations of the first anti-Stamp Act demonstration, to which they invited, according to Herder, not the rioters, but, quote, mainly upper and middle-class Bostonians who traveled in coaches and carriages to Roxbury or Dorchester for opulent feasts, unquote. When the British Parliament turned to its next attempt to tax the colonies, this time by a set of taxes which it hoped would not excite as much opposition, the colonial leaders organized boycotts. But they stressed, quote, no mobs or tumults, let the persons and properties of your most inveterate enemies be safe, unquote. Samuel Adams advised, quote, no mobs, no confusions, no tumult. And James Otis said that, quote, "No possible circumstances, though aversive, could be supposed sufficient to justify private tumults and disorders." Impressment and the quartering of troops by the British were directly hurtful to the sailors and other working people. After 1768, 2,000 soldiers were quartered in Boston, and friction grew between the crowds and the soldiers. The soldiers began to take the jobs of working people when jobs were scarce. Mechanics and shopkeepers lost work or business because of the colonists' boycott to British goods. In 1769, Boston set up a committee, quote, "to consider of some suitable methods of employing the poor of the town, whose numbers and distresses are daily increasing by the loss of its trade and commerce," unquote. On March 5th, 1770, grievances of rope makers against British soldiers taking their jobs led to a fight. A crowd gathered in front of the custom house and began provoking the soldiers, who fired and killed first Crispus Attucks, a mulatto worker, then others. This became known as the Boston Massacre. Feelings against the British mounted quickly. There was anger at the acquittal of 6 of the British soldiers. 2 were punished by having their thumbs branded and were discharged from the army. The crowd at the massacre was described by John Adams, defense attorney for the British soldiers, as, quote, "a motley rabble of saucy boys, Negroes, and mulattoes, Irish Teagues, and outlandish Jacktaws," unquote.
That's some old-fashioned racism for you. I have no idea what most of those words mean.
Sounds like Gangs of New York.
Yeah, it does. But yeah, so more and more unrest from the working class because their jobs were being taken, and they were, if you don't have a job in this society, just like today, you're pretty much screwed. So these people are fighting for their lives, and the tension just keeps getting ratcheted up and up, and you have the makings of a revolutionary war.
Perhaps 10,000 people marched in the funeral procession for the victims of the massacre, out of a total Boston population of 16,000. Wow. This led England to remove the troops from Boston and try to quiet the situation. Impressment was the background of the massacre. There had been impressment riots through the 1760s in New York and in Newport, Rhode Island, where 500 seamen, boys, and Negroes rioted after 5 weeks of impressment by the British. 6 weeks before the Boston Massacre, there was a battle in New York of seamen against British soldiers taking their jobs, and 1 seaman was killed. In the Boston Tea Party of December 1773, the Boston Committee of Correspondence formed a year before to organize anti-British actions, quote, "controlled crowd action against the tea from the start," Dirk Herter says. The Tea Party led to the coercive acts by Parliament, virtually establishing martial law in Massachusetts, dissolving the colonial government, closing the port in Boston, and sending in troops. Still, town meetings and mass meetings rose in opposition. The seizure of a powder store by the British led 4,000 men from all around Boston to assemble in Cambridge, where some of the wealthy officials had their sumptuous homes.
I'd like to point out, too, that just as we see today, when people have an uprising because of the conditions that they are not happy with, the response from the people in power is always to just violently crack down and hope that everything blows over. And yet, doing so does nothing at all to address the underlying reasons for it. There's still the horrid material conditions of the working class. So at best, it just keeps a lid on things until you just can't hold back people anymore, and they have nothing left to lose. And this happens again today. All the brutal crackdowns during the George Floyd demonstrations, the brutal crackdowns that have happened to most protests since that point, peaceful or otherwise. It doesn't seem to matter anymore. They seem to be at the point where they're just going to meet violence with any sort of deviation from the norm, no matter what. And there's only so long that's going to work. At some point, it has to boil over.
Yeah. Well said.
Thanks. All right, moving on.
The crowd forced the officials to resign. The committees of correspondence of Boston and other towns welcomed this gathering, but warned against destroying private property. Pauline Maier, who studied the development of opposition to Britain in the decade before 1776 in her book From Resistance to Revolution, emphasizes the moderation of the leadership and, despite their desire for resistance, their, quote, emphasis on order and restraint, unquote. She notes, quote, the officers and committee members of the Sons of Liberty were drawn almost entirely from the middle and upper classes of colonial society, unquote. In Newport, Rhode Island, for instance, the Sons of Liberty, according to a contemporary writer, quote, contained some gentlemen of the first figure in town for opulence, sense, and politeness, unquote. In North Carolina, quote, one of the wealthiest of the gentlemen and freeholders, unquote, led the Sons of Liberty. Similarly, in Virginia and Carolina. And, quote, New York's leaders, too, were involved in small but respectable independent business ventures, unquote. Their aim, however, was to broaden their organization, to develop a mass base of wage earners. Many of the Sons of Liberty groups declared, as in Milford, Connecticut, their, quote, greatest abhorrence, unquote, of lawlessness, or as in Annapolis, opposed, quote, all riots or unlawful assemblies tending toward the disturbance of the public tranquility, unquote. John Adams expressed the same fears, quote,
So there you go, middle and upper class. All they care about is the unrest and the violence and their own property. They don't care at all to understand why it's happening, or if they do, it's only in order to control things in their favor. But you know, it's just like how the middle class especially will endlessly debate. You know, did Colin Kaepernick protest in an appropriate manner? Did BLM riots or demonstrations shutting down traffic, is that dangerous or appropriate? It's always about the methods that protesters choose to use. It's never about, well, hey, what is it they're actually mad about in the first place?
Is that restraint element of, you know, let's keep it classy? I mean,
Right.
like building a guillotine and just like chopping off heads to get attention is it's not as classy as you want it to be, but it's the only thing to do.
At a certain point, people pushed far enough don't really have much recourse than to actually revolt. Yeah, that's true. And yeah, you know, they
Look,
oh no, you cut out just at the wrong
I think I
point
heard.
again. Oh dang.
they
Yep.
roll out the guillotines and their government's like, okay, well, if you want, please don't chop our heads off.
Vive la France! Dudes.
Yep. All
Yep.
they had to
Yep.
do, I think it was last year or the year before, was roll some guillotines onto the lawns of government buildings to let it know we ain't fucking playing in the government cave. That's how it should be. If
true.
government being scared of its people, not the other fucking way around.
Absolutely. And you know, it's very easy for people that are already comfortable and well off to you know, condemn violence and preach peace and that sort of thing. But it needs to be realized that for the people who are rising up, violence is already being committed against them every day. They're being deprived of their life, their liberty, and their pursuit of happiness, and that means death. So just because it's not, you know, one person striking another person or destroying a piece of property, doesn't mean it's not being committed and being committed without much care or compassion towards the people it's being committed against. It's just not as visible.
Violence and self-defense of the people against state violence and tyranny is fucking justifiable.
Mhm.
Always has been.
Yeah. Yep.
People like to
Yep.
talk about them, and that right there is what it was really fucking saying. That
Mhm.
you have the right to defend yourself against all threat, foreign and domestic, including a tyrannical government, especially a tyrannical government. If they are doing violence against you, what fucking other option do you have?
Yeah. Yep. But yeah. All right. Moving on.
These tarrings and featherings, this breaking open houses by the rude and insolent rabbles in resentment for private wrongs or in pursuit of private prejudice and passions, must be discountenanced. Unquote. In Virginia, it seemed clear to the educated gentry that something needed to be done to persuade the lower orders to join the revolutionary cause, to deflect their anger against England. One Virginian wrote in his diary in the spring of 1774, quote, "The lower class of people here are in tumult on account of reports from Boston. Many of them expect to be pressed and compelled to go and fight the Britons." Unquote. Around the time of the Stamp Act, a Virginia orator addressed the poor, quote, "Are not gentlemen made of the same materials as the lowest and poorest among you? Listen to no doctrines which may tend to divide us, but let us go hand in hand as brothers." Unquote. It was a problem for which the rhetorical talents of Patrick Henry were superbly fitted. He was, as Rice Isaac puts it, quote, "firmly attached to the world of the gentry, but he spoke in words that the poorer whites of Virginia could understand." Henry's fellow Virginian, Edmund Randolph, recalled his style as, quote, "simplicity and even carelessness, his pauses, which for their length might sometimes be feared to dispel the attention, riveted it the more by raising the expectation." Patrick Henry's oratory in Virginia pointed a way to relieve class tension between upper and lower classes and form a bond against the British. This was to find language inspiring to all classes, specific enough in its listing of grievances to charge people with anger against the British, vague enough to avoid class conflict among the rebels.
This right here is why you have to be very careful about people that talk about cross-class solidarity, as though there can be some sort of an alliance between the working class and the owner class, even though their interests are just fundamentally opposite. The owner class has a vested interest, as Marx pointed out, to get as much labor out of the working class as possible for as low of a price as possible. The working class has a vested interest in getting as much money out of the owner class for as little labor as possible. They're diametrically opposed, and they always will be under capitalism. So be careful when people are like, oh, we shouldn't be mad at the rich or mad at the owners or mad at the landlords, because they're trying to divert your attention elsewhere, and you have to wonder why.
Yep.
What purpose are they serving? In the case here, it was because they wanted to get rid of the monarchy, but not the class divisions. So they wanted everyone mad at the English, not the landlords, who were, much more directly, having their boot on the neck of the working class.
Imagine criminalizing anger.
Right. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, I mean that's kind of pretty close to where we're at now, when protests where no one has done anything violent to any person or destroyed any property can still get beaten by the cops. That's not much different than just criminalizing expressions of anger. So I'd say that's where we're at now.
Absolutely. And I mean, we even have morons like Biden out here saying, just keep peacefully protesting. You don't need to get volatile. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, you mean remain impotent, basically?
Right. Right. Yeah, because if you look at any significant movement for change that has actually accomplished anything, it has either caused violence itself very often, or responded to violence that was thrust upon it, or has just been the victim of violence. It's virtually impossible to get around violence altogether and make any significant change. Even things more recently, like gay marriage, that started out with the so-called Stonewall riot in New York City, where they were just a group of trans and gay and lesbian people were just so fed up with the cops beating them without repercussion just for having bars of their own. Like that's all they were doing. They had a gay club, and it got shut down and raided, and people's skulls got cracked in the process by the police as they were kicking people out, and they just decided they had enough. And as the story goes, it may be apocryphal, but it's that Marsha P. Johnson, a black trans activist, threw the first brick at the head of the cops, and that kicked off the entire movement for gay liberation that eventually culminated in gay marriage being legalized, and in the pride movements that still continue on to this day.
Right. I mean, last month we saw so many people bitch and pissing and moaning like, "How dare you say cops don't belong at Pride? Mother
Oh,
cops
I
don't belong at
hate
Pride."
that.
Okay, Pride started with Stonewall, a revolt against pig on the LGBTQ
Hmm.
community. No, the oppressors don't belong at Pride. There's
Absolutely.
just such fucking disconnection there between people fucking realizing the history of where Pride started at, of actually being a fight against police violence. Fuck no, pigs don't
Right.
belong at Pride.
Yeah.
No, absolutely
Totally
not.
tone deaf. They're
I
totally
mean,
tone deaf. Yeah.
mm-hmm. Sorry, but unless they're gonna show up to brick themselves in the fucking head, they can stay the fuck out of Pride.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's disgusting. It's let your oppressors come in and take part in your celebration. Yeah, I'm not. I have no sympathy for that point of view
So, like,
whatsoever.
technically, we have had a couple of revolts, like, the LA riots, and,
Hmm.
after George Floyd got murdered, like, everything
L-
popped off then. And
Largest
there are a
protest
couple
in the
here and
world
there.
ever. Hmm.
Right?
Yep. Yeah. A big problem though is that eventually people just they run out of juice. They have to go back to work. There's not enough of a direction in the anger that it leads to any sort of real overthrowing of the hierarchy. Um, so, and that's not to denigrate any of these movements at all. They are all very necessary steps in the path towards making a more just world. It's just that, I mean, Occupy fell apart for much the same reason. They couldn't quite get coalesce around a single set of messages. So eventually and I mean, it didn't hurt that the cops eventually just raided all of their encampments and kicked them out and treated them pretty terribly. But yeah, that was another that could have been the beginning of something huge. It probably was the beginning, of something huge. It just doesn't happen all linearly,
Right.
because I know very, very many people where that was their radicalizing
Mhm.
moment was Occupy, or the George Floyd uprisings.
Yeah. Because the
So
George Floyd murder, I mean, that like reverberated across the world. Like people are just
around the
kicking down
world,
statues everywhere. Like that's all you saw
oh yeah,
for weeks. Like, somebody else is getting liberated across the world because they saw that tape. They saw that
yeah,
footage. And it's
yeah.
like, so
That was the biggest mass movement in history numerically.
no
Nothing has
doubt.
ever been bigger. So it just shows how much frustration and pain and suffering is being endured by people that are being held down by the structure of the system.
Maybe we should all body cam. Like maybe we should just like just body cam the shit out of everything you do and like just go somewhere and hide
Yeah.
it. But then, you get into an altercation if some police fuck with you or
Yeah.
something happened. Like,
Well, I
cause I
mean
just
that.
feel like this
Sure.
era is so weird. If you don't have footage of it, it didn't happen. And
Right.
nobody wants to know.
But I mean, body footage or camera footage is the thing that has turned around the public perception of the police.
You
When it
know?
was in the 90s when Rodney King popped off, the only reason that happened is because they finally had video proof of it.
Yep.
Otherwise, they would have just been like, like you see every single time all these apologists rush in. Oh, I'm sure the police had good reason. They were a thug anyway. Let's dig into all of their backstory and make it so that they deserved it, even though
Yep.
like pre-crime's not supposed to be a thing, and everyone's supposed to have right to a fair trial. But if they're a bad enough person, I guess we'll just let it slide and throw the entire Constitution out the window. In that case, that at least according to these reactionaries. Um, but yeah, it is a power. It can be a powerful tool, just documenting things as they are. Um, it that's what turned around the finally the public perception of Black Lives Matter is they just had enough video evidence to win the case in the court of public opinion, which
That's it.
is key. Um,
Yeah, right
thank,
to a fair trial is BS.
yeah,
Saying,
because
yeah,
depending on how much money and how much class privilege you have going into it, is going to determine how fair that trial is from the onset. Not to mention how representative the jury of your peers is of
yeah, right.
society. Thanks for the follow, Paula Licks. Paula Licks, the song, yeah. Paula Licks Politics. That's funny. Um, all right. We are getting towards the end of my time tonight, so I think we'll probably get to the end of the next. We'll find a good place to stop in the text, and then we'll kind of wrap it up for the night.
And stirring enough to build patriotic feeling for the resistance movement. Thomas Paine's Common Sense, which appeared in early 1776 and became the most popular pamphlet in the American colonies, did this. It made the first bold argument for independence in words that any fairly literate person could understand. Quote, "Society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil." Unquote. Paine disposed of the idea of the divine right of kings by a pungent history of the British monarchy, going back to the Norman conquest of 1066, when William the Conqueror came over from France to set himself on the British throne. Quote, "A French bastard landing with an armed banditti and establishing himself King of England against the consent of the natives is in plain terms a very paltry, rascally original. It certainly hath no divinity in it."
Very interesting. So he's saying that what swayed the people's opinion most of all is just tearing down this divine right of kings, which still held sway up until that point. Like, don't forget that the U.S. or the American colonies were under a monarchy up until that point, and that's what they were revolting against. So perhaps books like this one, The People's History of the United States, are one of the best tools to dismantle the supposed great men of history, which I think is probably the closest analog to the divine right of kings that we have now. The idea that the brightest and the smartest just naturally rise to the top and create vast empires of wealth through their genius ideas and business acumen and stuff like that. The Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos sort of people in the world. So I think books like this can help tear down those narratives. And perhaps maybe that's the thing that we need most of all in order to be ready for a more just world.
Good stuff.
Very much. All right. So I think it's... Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Trisha.
Just to say, it wipes away the bullshit that everything's been coded in. To, try to make
For
this
sure.
look like what it really isn't.
Yeah.
And in their case, when it comes to this divine right of kings, I find it kind of fucking ironic that they were calling him out as a French bastard usurping the English throne when literally all of the royal families of every country in Europe, they were one family. They were all a bunch of cousin fuckers who were just intermarrying with
Oh,
each
yeah.
other to keep one large family.
One pure
and all of the
bloodline.
cousins
That's right.
here. Yeah. And it's like, oh God, so what, the wrong cousin took the throne? Fuck
Yeah.
off, none of them deserve it.
Uh-huh. Very true. Very true. So yeah, divine right of kings, utter bullshit. has no basis in reality. You can prop it up with all the mythology that the church puts behind it just to secure their own power. But when it
Yeah.
comes down to it, it's based on nothing. Same thing is true with the great men of history, the inevitability of capitalism to always prevail. These are just myths. They don't have real basis in fact or history. And the more we look at that, the more we'll see that's the case.
Oh my
That
goodness.
no one deserves to rule. I mean, that's really it. That
So,
that's leftism summed up in one sentence. Nobody deserves to rule.
mhm.
All power to the people.
All power to the people.
There it
Right on.
is. There it is.
All right. Would you guys have any closing thoughts before we wrap up tonight? Anything you want to plug or anything at all?
May the Molotov cocktails be with you.
And also with you.
I got one. From the Boston Massacre to today, looks
Mhm.
like everybody's been like fighting against the government, and it's
Mhm.
like, it's not working. It's like yelling at a building is not going to do what you think it's going to do. Going outside and screaming at the air is not going to do what you think it's going to do. It needs to be, you know, Second Amendment.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, on the truth of the matter is that the Second Amendment was written at a time when it took 30 seconds to reload a musket, and you had maybe a 30% chance of actually striking your target at the time. So because weaponry has advanced so much till today, there could be no real just direct of the people revolt against the government. It would take buy-in from at least powerful politicians who themselves would have to control at least a few branches of the military at the same time in order for any of that sort of thing to ever work in that way. But there are other ways we can resist. There are other things, courses that we can take. We can build dual power through networks of mutual aid, where we provide, where the government has failed, and we show the hypocrisy and the lies that they promote, trying to act like they are for the people when they leave the largest chunk of people behind time and time again. By us doing what they have failed to do, that more than anything just throws into sharp relief how much of a failure the bourgeois system is for most people. So there's that. We can do general strikes and we can support strike workers. Like a general strike across the nation, if it were to be feasible, if we could actually coordinate something that large, would bring this country to its knees immediately. And then at that point, whatever demands that we had, wouldn't matter how many guns there were, they can't force us all back to work because, like Trisha mentioned earlier, we way outnumber all of them, including the military. They're not going to bomb their entire support structure for failing to show up to work the next day because they depend on us. And that's the thing we have to keep remembering. They depend on us much more than we depend on them. Because without us, they have no business. They can yell at their machinery all day long. It's not going to make their products. They can yell at their app development uh, uh, company all day long. It's not going to make an app for them without workers. Workers make the gears of the world work.
Yep.
So with enough of us in solidarity, we could do a general strike, and then we could just simply demand to end private property, and collectivize all the means of production, however that looks, whether that's mitigated through government or whether that's just directly given to the workers of a given company to manage democratically. There's many ways to do that. So
Isn't the means of production the internet at this point?
that is a big part of it. Yeah.
We can see that right now.
It should also be socialized. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
And to be fair, like, I wouldn't trust the government to mitigate the property issue without trying to find some for themselves to still exploit it. I think the more direct route of
Yeah.
every fucking business, if you work there, you now get a stake in the company. I think that would be our best
Yeah.
route because that actually puts that
Hmm.
power in the hands of the people, not a
Other
government
people.
that's shown us time and time again that they refuse to represent us.
Hmm.
Okay, so
Absolutely.
check it out. Homie works at as some dude work at Subway somewhere, and his
Right.
job is to clean it up and then lock the doors or whatever at a
Hmm.
certain time.
Hmm.
All right, so since everybody who has jobs like that, the whoever is the supervisors of jobs like that, where they have keys to the building or keys to the office, like everybody who's got keys has just locked the boss out at the same time, on the
Hmm.
same day, at the same hour, across several time zones. Boom, bam, lock
Hmm.
out.
Yeah. Yeah, and employers do it to employees. They do lockouts rather than have to face unionization. So there's no reason
Yeah.
that we couldn't do it back to them. But it takes coordination and it takes everyone doing things together. I mean,
Yep.
wildcat strikes can be good. It keeps the focus on workers' rights and the movement for workers' rights. But at the same time, the only effective movement is one that coordinates together
Yep.
um, to
And I
really
mean,
make
we would have
change.
to coordinate together in mass planning ahead of time to make sure that everybody first has the
For sure.
food and water and gas, things like that they're going to need during said strike,
Hmm.
because we absolutely do need to do a general strike, but that's going to include people who work in shipping and stuff that would
Yep.
otherwise be bringing people the things that they need. If we're going to shut down every fucking thing, then we have to make sure that those going on strike have everything that they need for the duration of said strike first, and then
You
shut
would
it all the fuck down.
you would have to
Hmm.
seize like so like it would I guess it would look like kind of a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and everything at the bottom, whoever is supervisors or managers over those things that are in they
Hmm.
seize, and then next level up is like access to X, Y, and Z they seize, and next
Right.
level up is like everybody
Right.
has to be like sort of registered on a the
Yeah.
hierarchy,
So
to catch everything.
So one place that we could start is like with take a large city and do a citywide rent strike. If you could convince everyone to just say no, we are not dealing with landlords anymore, there'd be nothing they could do about it. They would all go out of business within a month or two, and you can't evict an entire city. It's just not going to happen. Um, Again, it takes coordination and everyone being on board with the plan, but it is a possibility.
If you
Or at
want
the
to, if you get like one of your teachings, like how you're doing the Howard Zen is like, really good stuff. So then you have some seminar that like is 15 minutes or less, just sort of explaining, or 3 minutes or less or whatever, just explaining the law, the rights, what to say when, so and so comes and waves a piece of paper in your face, lawyers call you on the phone, whatever, like, prepare them for what's going to happen, and tell them the legal things that, everybody would have to have like some sort of impromptu script as to what to say, and what to do and what to check in with. Because like most people would just be like, they would tell you no to this idea of a rent strike because you're like, I don't want to fuck up with my landlord. I don't want to end up
Mhm.
homeless. And then
Mhm.
you have to like counter with like, actually, blah blah blah, the law, blah blah blah, rent strike, blah blah blah, power to the people, blah blah
Mhm.
blah, workers of the world unite, Paula Links. Bam.
Well,
Yeah.
it would take absolute solidarity with your neighbors, with your community. That if the fucking pigs show up with an eviction notice trying to drag your shit out, that your whole neighborhood comes together on your lawn saying, "Fuck you!
Yeah.
You're not kicking anybody out today. Get the fuck out of here. This is
Yeah.
your property, pig." You
You know,
know
you're gonna need to show that movie Braveheart, like, and then you're also gonna need to show like Gladiator. You're gonna need to like have a watch party and show 300 real quick and get
Mhm.
everybody juiced up, because you basically you basically kind of militarizing, the proletariat, who would have to like turn on, quickly turn into, because like when you say solidarity and unity,
Mhm.
you're really talking about a company. I mean, well, company, but you're really talking about like a legion, a fleet. Like people will have to think of themselves
A
as
whole
not,
network.
people
Yes.
with rights, but soldiers.
In
I
a
know
certain
that
way.
sounds
in a certain way, but more soldiers in just providing the basic needs and necessities and not allowing the power to just throw its weight around and have its way with you because an arbitrary law written by people who are trying to defend property says that they can do so.
Yeah.
But I just put a link in the chat there for this really great podcast. It's called Rebel Steps, and it will teach you kind of step by step how to get involved in a movement. What to expect with organization, different forms of organization, and and it does go into things. I think it does an episode on rent strikes and stuff like that. But I can definitely cover that sort of thing more often in the future, maybe on my Sunday streams that I kind of leave more open. But yeah, Paulo Lick says, "Work as the world unite." Definitely agree with that statement. Right on. Um, yeah, James, you're very right. Defense, not offense. And the idea being that we're never going to look for a fight because we probably don't have to. The powers that be, if they feel threatened enough, are going to come down on us no matter what we do. Even if we're just doing mutual aid, like they've violently repressed food not bombs for decades in many places, just for feeding homeless people in the park. So yeah, there's no reason to ever go looking for a fight. It's not a heroic or valorous thing to do. But we at the same time have to be able to stand with each other if a fight comes to us to defend one another.
That's righteous.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining me tonight. It was great to see you again, Shanika. Great to see you again, Trish. And I can't wait to have you on future streams. So I think this Wednesday, I'm going to be doing. There's one that I've been wanting to cover for a while. It's a Helen Keller short essay. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick. It's in my playlists here.
Hell yeah.
Keller. I went to Keller school.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Let's see.
I remember her.
Those are quite based.
Where is it? Wobblies.
I didn't
It's
learn.
it's
I wish I could. Yeah, I need to learn more.
sure. So it's just a short essay. It's called "On Behalf of the IWW," and it's by Helen Keller. And it's a classic socialist unionist essay from 1918, a little over 100 years ago. But yeah, it was recommended in the Discord, which all of y'all should join the Discord. And yeah, should be a good time. So look for that this Wednesday. And other than that, I will say goodnight to you, Trisha, and you, Shanika, and
No.
see you guys next time.
Fuck yeah.
All right, so that was Chapter 4, Part 2 of A People's History of the United States. And we'll be continuing on the series next Monday for Part 3. And let's see, we're most of the way through now. We made a good amount of progress. So we're just past the halfway mark. We have, it goes up to an hour and 3, and we are 36 minutes into it, so just past the halfway mark. So yeah, exciting stuff. And I will see you all next time. It doesn't look like we have enough to raid anybody, so I will instead shout out someone. So we have at Left Signal Boost TV, our newest member is does a blog. Let me pull it up real quick here. Oh, my computer's being slow. All right. So it is called, what is it called? I think it's called Proles Academy. Why am I not seeing it? EFG. Let's see. Oh, well, it's not coming up for some reason. But I'll just have to search for it in Facebook. It's called Proles Academy. He takes leftist literature. Or Prole Academy, not Proles Academy. My mistake. He takes leftist literature, like he's broken down Pedagogy of the Oppressed, a really great book that breaks down the structures of oppression. And turned it into an infographic, so it's a little bit easier to digest. So check out Prol Academy, our newest member at Left Signal Boost TV. Also, please check out Left Signal Boost TV. I will shout that out one more time here. Because if you like this sort of thing, we're now up to, I believe, 15 members. Various sort of leftist creators, and we all share to the same space to try and boost our collective reach. So a lot of us live stream there. Those of us that are not live streamers post whatever it is, links to whatever content that they're putting out. So I highly encourage you to check that out. And until next time, have a great night. I would say happy 4th, but there's not much to celebrate in this country right now, the way things are going. So solidarity, if you are feeling the strain of the quick right turn that our country is going into, and just know that there are people out there who stand with you and have better ideas in mind than are being put out in the mainstream.